Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in with us on your Friday morning. My name is Joelle Badman, and I am the Training and Development Manager with ACIC, the Atlantic Council for International Cooperation. I am very excited to be starting off this 6th day of International Development Week with this event titled Poetry, Prose, and Print, Sustainable Development Goals Through the Literary Arts.
Recording in progress.
For those of you, I might maybe just use this as a chance to remind everybody to keep themselves muted as we're going through this, just so there isn't any feedback. For anybody who's maybe new to ACIC and our work, we are a coalition of individuals, organizations, and institutions working in the Atlantic region to build and model just, equitable, and sustainable communities, both locally and globally. We also represent and amplify the voice of Atlantic Canada and connect the Atlantic region with other provincial, national, and international stakeholders. We have over 70 members in the Atlantic provinces who are united by our strong commitment to building a better world. I would like to start off by acknowledging that ACIC is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm joining this event from Shabuktuk, or Halifax, and I'd love to invite you to take this time to add your land to the chat box if you know it. There are just a few housekeeping items that I want to go over before we start. We are recording this session, and a copy of the event will be shared with everybody who registered probably sometime early next week. As I mentioned, please make sure your microphone is muted just so that we don't have any background noise going on while our authors are speaking. If you'd like to, please use the chat box to say hi to everyone and introduce yourself. You can also enable live transcription by clicking on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And of course, just a reminder that in any communication in the chat box, we invite you to be respectful and inclusive in your language. There will be a question and answer towards the end of the event today. So if there's at any point in time you have a question percolating in your brain, just pop them into the chat and we'll try to go through as many of them as we can during that portion of the event. And my last little bit of housekeeping is just to say that we will be doing a draw for a book prize pack featuring a book from each of our authors today. We'll have a very short survey shared at the end of the event, and anybody who completes the survey will be entered into that draw. So stick around and we'll make sure you get that link so that you have a chance of winning these 4 really wonderful books. This year marks the 32nd anniversary of International Development Week, which is a national celebration across Canada that aims to inform, inspire, and involve Canadians in Canada's international development efforts. IDW is a time to strengthen collaborative efforts and tackle local and global challenges. And we've learned in events and activities that have taken place throughout this week already that tackling local and global challenges can look a number of different ways. On Monday, ACIC members Memorial University Internationalization Office and World University Services Canada, or WUSC, brought together students who spoke about their involvement in the Student Refugee Program, which is a unique peer-to-peer sponsorship model where student volunteer groups at post-secondary campuses sponsor refugee students to come to Canada. And since its beginning in 1978, the SRP has sponsored more than 2,000 refugee students to Canada. On Tuesday night, the Coady Institute and ACIC hosted keynote speaker Winnie Korn-Miller on the topic of exploring peace, change, and activism. Winnie shared the history of her mother's activism and her own, and noted quite poignantly that anger is important. Anger is like a fire, but if you only act from a source of anger, that anger will soon cannibalize your spirit and it will take over your mind. Anger will get you up and moving, but you always have to go back to love. Another ACIC member, Venture to Impact, hosted a webinar on Thursday with their partner organization, Child Fund Uganda, where they shared the process by which they created, in partnership, a digital data collection program to address a variety of case management needs that CFU was facing in their work with more than 30,000 vulnerable children and families. As Martin Odipo CJ from CFU said, the design thinking was empowering by its nature. It was a case of understanding the issue and co-creating what the solution could be, which really further highlights for all of us the key role that partnerships can play in creating meaningful and lasting change. And yesterday, I had the pleasure of attending a panel at Memorial University on internationalization of higher education from an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. And there was a speaker there from the University of Albany named Dr. Harvey Charles. And he reminded us that internationalization in higher education has to be more than just go abroad programs and recruiting international students. All students must be guaranteed multiple, intentional, and substantive encounters with global perspectives without having to leave their university campus. These are just a few highlights from events throughout this week, and there really has been an incredible slate of activities and campaigns since IDW started. As we come kind of to the end of IDW now, we shift our attention to another way to address challenges and implement change, both locally and globally, which is through the arts. Art influences our society in so many different ways. It shines a light on issues, it instills values, it bridges perspectives, and it translates experiences across different groups. It changes opinions and it influences actions. At the heart of art is communication. It allows people with varying backgrounds and experiences to communicate with one another using images, sounds, and in the case of our artists today, stories and poetry. Today's event, Poetry, Prose, and Print, SDGs through the Literary Arts, is a celebration of 4 Atlantic Canadian authors who have each created works of art to showcase how they experience the world and explore ways to make it a better place. It's my pleasure now to pass things over to my colleague, Leanne Lavelle, who's the ACIC Internship Manager and also based in Shabuktuk. Leanne has worked in the NGO sector for 10 years. She holds an MSW from McGill University and a BA in English from Dalhousie. She is a self-professed bookworm and an aspiring writer, and we really couldn't imagine anybody better suited to moderate an event like this today. So welcome, Leanne.
Thank you, Joelle. We're just getting our tech sorted here. Thank you, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today and to be joined by such esteemed authors from across Atlantic Canada. As Joelle mentioned, we're joined today by Ali Etarnichi, author of Just a Cab Driver, My Journey from Behind the Wheel to Behind the Microphone, Kayla Geitzler, author of That Light Feeling Under Your Feet, Jane Ledwell, author of Return of the Wild Goose, and Julie Pelletier-Lush, author of Abegwe, Mi'kmaq Poetry from Prince Edward Island. To give you a sense of the format for our event today, we'll be giving each of our authors the opportunity to read from a section of their published work. They'll each have about 10 minutes to read, and after each reading, I have some questions for each author about their work. Once everyone has read, we'll also do a final audience Q&A at the end of the event. So for anyone joining us today, if you have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat box and we'll try to go through as many as we can towards the end of the event today. And at that time, I'll also love to invite our authors to contribute questions for one another at that time as well. So we're going to kick things off by hearing today first from Julie Pelletier-Lush. Julie is the Poet Laureate for PEI and works as a renowned knowledge keeper with Lunwe, an initiative focused on protecting, preserving, and implementing the constitutionally entrenched rights of the Mi'kmaq of Prince Edward Island. Julie, Julie, the founding member of the Mi'kmaq Legends Theatre Troupe, preserves the history and culture of the Mi'kmaq for future generations. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. It's too early this morning. Julie is the founding member of the Mi'kmaq Legends Theatre Troupe and preserves the history and culture of the Mi'kmaq for future generations through her work as a writer, actress, photographer, and mentor to young performers. Some of her best-selling books include My Mi'kmaq Mother and Mi'kmaq Campfire Stories of Prince Edward Island. Julie received the Senator's 150 Medal in April 2019, the Governor General's Meritorious Service Medal in 2017, and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2013. Julie will be sharing from her debut poetry collection, Abegwe, Mi'kmaq Poetry from Prince Edward Island. This highly anticipated collection enthralls with the unique word weaves that Julie creates to connect deeply with the hearts and minds of readers. Sometimes the vivid poems remind us of the teachings of elders, at other times they are heart-wrenching, and at other times they serve as a call to action for Mother Earth. A warm welcome, Julie, and I'll pass it over to you.
Gwe, Jalasi, Ndeluisi Julie, hello and welcome. My name is Julie. I am Mi'kmaq, and I reside in this beautiful unceded territory known as Mi'kma'ki, and I'd like to welcome all of you in peace and friendship. I had a smudge going just so that we can start things off in the right way to bring a whole bunch of positive in. and clean out all the negative, because you know there's so much that we carry on our shoulders these days that we don't need to carry. So I'm going to jump right in because I know we have a time limit here. Now, the first poem, I had just a couple that I had earmarked for this, but the first one was a teaching that I got from an elder. We were at a meeting with the Aboriginal Women's Association of PEI and talking about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So it was a hard meeting, lots of information and lots of knowledge. And one of the elders just kept getting up and leaving the meeting and going outside. So I got up and watched her at one point, and she was laying down on the grass and she was rubbing her hands on the grass like this. And I asked her after what she'd been doing, and she said she was grounding herself. So I wrote this poem about that. When things are going wrong and you don't know what to do, ground yourself. When your heart is broken and your spirit is blue, ground yourself. When you feel all alone and you wish someone was there, ground yourself. When your self-worth is low and your anxiety just seems to grow and grow, ground yourself. I know the battle that you fight, each day a struggle to make things right, ground yourself. Open your heart and try and heal, ground yourself and breathe. Sit by running water, feel the earth between your toes. Let the negative energy go back into the ground. Your struggle is real with all you endure each day. I know that there's hearts that loves you, eyes that long to see you, arms that long to hug you. You are loved, and remember, when things go bad, just ground yourself. And now I was thinking of, there's so many different reasons why I write a poem. And honestly, this reason had been, for this poem, I call it The Child Sweep, and it's a poem that I wrote about the 60s scoop in our Indigenous community, where a lot of our children didn't get taken by residential school, but the next sort of round of it was where Child and Family Services or different organizations took a whole bunch of our Indigenous children, and they were sort of spearheaded from all over North America. A lot of these children are still finding their way home. So when I heard a few of these stories, I knew I had to write something. And I call this one Child Sweep. My baby, where are you tonight? After I was born, I left the hospital real late by car. I'm not sure where I'm going, but not very far. My baby, where are you tonight? I can now say mummy, and I'm learning how to walk. I think my parents love me because they smile when I talk. My baby, where are you tonight? Today I am turning 2. I am still tiny and small. Sometimes I get so angry, but my parents catch me when I fall. My baby, where are you tonight? Today I am turning 3, and preschool is a horror. Today I was bad, and I had to go sit in the corner. My baby, where are you tonight? I am 6 today, and I feel like a fool. I was called a wagon burner today in my school. My baby, where are you tonight? I am 10 today, and I don't really feel the same. The kids won't let me play in their fun and their games. My baby, where are you tonight? I am 12 today, Mom, and I heard my parents say, it is not our fault. She's not ours. Let's send her on her way. My baby, where are you tonight? I'm 13 now, and I have a friend who is 19. He said he loves me, and he is everything I've ever dreamed. My baby, where are you tonight? Today I'm 14, Mama, and I have a baby. I'm not sure why everyone keeps calling me crazy. My baby, where are you tonight? I am 15 today, and they took away my baby. I am taking drugs sometimes to make my days go hazy. My baby, where are you tonight? I am 16 today, and I need money all the time. The police know me, but why is being Native part of my crime? My baby, where are you tonight? I thought of looking for you today, not sure why you gave me away. My baby, where are you tonight? Mommy, oh mommy, I'm 19 right now. I'm trying to get better. I just need help to learn how. My baby, where are you tonight? On a plane coming to you in PEI tonight to find my roots and try and make everything all right. My baby, I can't believe I'm holding you tonight. Here I am, Mom, and I think that now I will be all right. Now please sit with me and just hold me tight. Now, when I wrote that one, I'd been talking to people who finally returned home after being separated from their families and their communities with no explanation and no reason as to the whys. And I knew I had to write something to address that one particular dark part of our history so that people could see it as actual faces, actual people, actual emotions that went with it. Now, my last one that I'm going to share, because I still think I have a few minutes, this is a very short one. It's called I Believe. Now, I wrote this one a long time ago, and I want to share it now because I'll tell you after. It's called I Believe. I believed everyone was treated equally. I believed everyone had access to all they needed. I believed everyone had a childhood full of fairy tales. I believed that when you were old, there was always somebody going to be there. I don't believe that anymore. I believe we must fight for equal rights for everyone. I believe that even here in Canada, we do not have access to what we need. I believe we must protect the children who wake up cold, hurt, hungry, and afraid. I believe we can all have access to clean water, clean air, and good food. I believe we can learn how to help those who cannot help themselves. The elders who need love and someone to be there, the children who need us to notice blank stares. I believe someday we can all be equal. It's not that hard. I do believe. As I said, I wrote that quite a while ago, and I still believe that even though the years have passed since pen has gone to paper to create this poem, that it's still as applicable now as it was back then when it was first written. We still have to fight. We still have to keep these issues up and foremost in our heads to move forward together. As a reminder of all of those things. So, Walalio, I think I will end my part there. I don't think I had a note, but I think it'll be a good time to move on to the next portion. And oh, I love that you can see that there is more on me in the chat. So if you wanted to just click on there and have a look. Oh, and this is the book. It's Abagwit Mi'kmaq Poetry from Prince Edward Island. And there's me on the cover holding my drum. And this is out at Cavendish Beach. It's absolutely beautiful out there. And this amazing parks worker who we were doing a project out there just snapped this picture while I was standing there getting ready for a drone to come up over that cliff and do this aerial footage. So every part of the title ends up having a story, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that reading. So I had, I don't know what's going on with my throat this morning. I apologize. As you said, as part of your reading, you said there's so many different reasons why you write a poem. And, you know, so the transition of those two pieces you shared and sharing the importance of and the harmful impacts of colonization through the legacy of the 60s scoop, residential school survivors, and other impacts on Indigenous communities, but then also that importance of the call for action now for everyone in Canada to work together because of that. I love that in the poem, the resonant I believe in the fight for equal rights, that we can all have access to clean water. These are things that serve as a rallying cry for us as communities across the country. And within your work of poetry, there are so many different themes evoked, these calls to action for equitable rights for all, the feelings of pride in sharing Mi'kmaq communities' connections to the land, the importance of environmental stewardship, the importance of preserving the history and culture of Mi'kmaq for future generations, and keeping that fight. So the question that I have is, tying it also into your story about the photo on the cover, within your book of poetry, you have a number of different artistic paintings and pieces of visual pieces to accompany your poems that you've done as well. So my question is, what unique role does poetry play in sharing these messages with readers? And maybe even broadening it, poetry and visual art in the case of this collection.
Well, I did the art, honestly, as a side piece for the book, because in my knowledge, myself, first and foremost, I love doing poetry. I love reading poetry. I love hearing poetry. And I also am that person who loves laying in the grass, looking up the clouds and trying to find pictures and images in those clouds. So I wanted to be able to sort of capture that emotion, that feeling, so that as you read each poem has a picture that has just different textures, different contours, different colors, different shapes. And they're not any really particular image or shape. So you have to look through it and just see what you want to pick out of it. And in terms of getting these messages across in poetry, it's the safest and easiest way to do it, because you can say these words and people might just capture, my baby, and that might be what they are able to take away with them, and that's totally fine. And then they'll read it maybe a month from now and they'll take away a little bit more of the message. This isn't a lecture or dissertation where you're going to have to end up having to memorize or regurgitate any of this. This is a feeling. It's one heart to another. So whatever your heart is ready to and prepared to accept and take in the words that I share, it's just really open to you. And it's like a story, or it's a song. Some of the songs will capture your imagination and you'll be invested in it, just like poetry, just like good stories. And so that's what I always think the best way of poetry is, that it gets into your heart in a very, very gentle way. And it doesn't have to move you, but it can move you. And it doesn't have to change you, but it can make you see things a little clearer. So I think poetry is the best way in terms of trying to get some of these messages out, because it's gentle, it's calm, it's kind. And at any point in time, you can close the book and say, that's enough for now. My head is full, my heart is full, and I'll come back to it next week or next month or tomorrow. So I think the best way to be able to share issues and thoughts and ideas that are normally very, very hard to share and very hard to digest as a reader or as a listener is through poetry, because poetry is such a gentle way to share these messages.
Thank you. I love that that comment about poetry is like a point of different access points for the reader to connect. And my second question for you is just around that this is your debut collection of poetry. You are PEI's Poet Laureate, and this is your first collection of poems, which was published in the fall of this past year, 2021. So I just wanted to ask, why now, and how does it feel to have a debut collection of poetry following on your other works of prose and art that you've already published?
Believe it or not, I have a vision of somebody going into an Indigo or a Bookmark and saying, oh, I've heard about this author, Julie Pelletier-Lush, and they can say, oh, well, there's a memoir in the memoir section of Julie. Oh, there's a children's book in the children's section. There's a poetry book in the poetry section, and the next book I'm working on is Ghost Stories of PEI. So I'm gonna, I want to try to cover all the bases and not be sort of locked down into something. But the poetry book in particular was very, very important for me to be able to share, because I had gone to meet all the other poet laureates across Canada before COVID set in, and they all had these beautiful published books and all these works, and I had a binder full of all my papers. Not that I don't have poems, I have so many poems, but I have them like this. And eventually I came back and I talked to Acorn Press and said, I have all these poems. What if I organize them into different sections? And I gave you just, like a quarter of my poems. Would you put them in a book for me, so that if ever I'm in a place where I have to sort of showcase some of my work, I have something beautiful to be able to hand out and to be able to share with people. Not that, you know, a lot of times when somebody says, oh, I love that poem, I just have them in Word docs, so I'll just email them to people. And I'm totally fine with that, especially the prayers that I write and those sort of things. But just to be able to have it in a book form was such an honor, and to be able to get to that point where I was able to share some of these works in this way, so that it will go farther. It'll be able to go different places that maybe I wouldn't be able to go myself. So that was my hope. With some of these works will be there and outlast me in libraries, hopefully farther than PEI, farther than North America, and that maybe somebody somewhere will be able to see and connect to my heart and the words that I share in these books.
And it is such a beautiful collection.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you for kicking us off this morning.
Thank you.
So we're going to move into a conversation next with Kayla Geitzler, and I'd like to invite Kayla to start by reading from her work. Kayla is from Moncton, New Brunswick, which is within Saganaged of the Mi'kma'ki. She is Moncton's first Anglophone poet laureate and host of the Attic Owl Reading Series. Named a Rad Woman of Canadian Poetry, she holds an MA in English Creative Writing and has worked as a technical editor for Canada's largest environmental consultation firm. As an editor and writing consultant, Kayla offers full-service writing, writing mentorship, and workshops to help individuals achieve their writing goals. Co-editor of the poetry compilation Cadence, Voix Féminines, Female Voices, and writing life columnist for the Miramichi Reader, Kayla was awarded the Moncton Chamber of Commerce Top 20 Under 40 Award for her dedication to literary arts in 2021. Her writing has been published in Canada, the US, and internationally. Kayla will be reciting from her first book, That Light Feeling Under Your Feet, where she explores the liminal space between labor and leisure and masterfully crafts words that challenge perpetuating colonial and class relations, as well as hedonistic lifestyles. This book was a Calgary bestseller and finalist for 2 poetry awards. And I'll hand it over to you, Kayla.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here to be reading for such a worthy organization as the ACIC. And I'm so excited to be reading with these other excellent authors. What should you know about my book? Okay, so there's a note in the end that says you can't prove anything that I've written about, that it's tech, you can't verify it as truth, but they're all true stories. I just didn't want to get sued. They'd asked us to do a reading according to some sustainable development goals. So a lot of my work touched on various ones, but I'll be looking at gender equality, decent work, reduced inequalities, and life below water. The book is about the 2 years that I worked on cruise ships. Crowd control training. First thing is my name, 2 simple syllables, run and deep. Think of a man who has run great distances over treacherous waves and tiger-angry tides to this fleet. Forget home. Saturnalia is your family now. In a year, when your contract ends, you will go back to your village, to the roosters crowing through clusters of night jasmine, to the chime of Ganta, and clanging bicycle bells winding through the market, past clamoring beggars and old men at the well drinking tumblers of tea. Each day will pass with an unbearable slowness, and you will sleep poorly on a bed that does not rock, tortured, until you are once again at sea. But most importantly, you are thinking, Randeep, this will never happen to me. But I have been here 7 years. Saturnalia is now my mother and brothers. My wife visits me less and less every year. She fills my cabin with flowers, makes chapati, becomes cross with my drinking in the crew bar, and leaves. All I'm telling you is true. One day you will forget. There hasn't always been a light feeling underneath your feet. So I worked on a ship that was 19 years old. That's like 90 in human years. There was a hole in the front of the ship and it would leak oil all the way from our home port, New Orleans, to Mexico. And so every 3 weeks, the underwater welders would come and fix the ship. Afraid of nightly engine fires, I slept in my clothes for 6 weeks until I went for supper in the staff mess and observed the underwater welders' waterlogged jowls, the photoluminescent curves of their biceps, clavicles, their slow motion mastication of mahi-mahi slipped half raw under the heat lamps. Another difficult day in fins, compression, deadweight gas cylinders, diving hats and circuit breakers, magnesium flare, reflected in halo like irises, their expressions serene from suturing in darkness, nitrogen raptures tempered from torn hull, seen only in glimpses. There are 3 revenge poems in this book, and this is Revenge Best Served with Ghost Ship. Early morning sleep, perforated by thunderous feet running past cabin doors, someone crying, "C-Day, C-Day" in the hall, cursing and shuffling, Steiners and casino dealers straightening uniform over booze-bloated bellies as they trip over dancers, raising Senior Frog glasses to work ethic. Sleep-deprived shoppies salute the day with "fuck off" and roll over until the manager phones, "Get up to the shops now, you twats." And through anemic asbestos walls, their disbelief unites in a boys' choir of stiff stretches and hangover tumbles from bunks, deodorant smeared under Navy cruise line polos as photophobic eyes squint out portholes. Oh God, we're stationary. Sandbar moored in the Mississippi's middle, a whole day late getting back to Nolans, 10 hours with angry flight missed passengers. To feed them, staff and crew meals rationed. Then, in the terminal, 700 would-be cruisers ugly with luggage, the midnight of our souls in their flushed faces. 4 days of the guests from hell, vomit in the stairwells, riots over souvenir maracas and 3XL t-shirts, stewards and bar staff weeping. Despite captain intervention, even a food fight night of the black and white ball. So the AV department played horror movies. Whenever anyone turned on the TV, there was Ghost Ship, The Poseidon Adventure, Open Water, Titanic, The Perfect Storm, any scenario where seas swallowed vessels and everybody fucking drowned. Balls. "Someday you will thank me," said the shop's manager, as I turned my back to his insolent smoke rings, his arrogance and certainty. Returned to the dogged afternoon, this lady seeking my altered identity with some admiration. She was beautiful. No, that wasn't you, darling. Her acrylic nails threading between my fingers, gripping apologetically, the small tick in her face jumping at the pumice of my calluses, formed from hours of heavy lifting. But maybe someday, unkind, unable to find in my bare face the elegant and mysterious formal night beauty, no hot chick chic and endearing sass that occurs when bustier hooks cage the tomboy's spine and midnight hose is drawn muscled thigh high, the transformation to a heroine, the succession of bi-monthly marriage proposals. Jesus wept and I stepped into stilettos, squeezed as much ass into his little dress as possible. The painful pressure of eyeliner when the cosmetician murmured, "My, you clean up well." My pale brow and steep cheekbones color collaged into sharp angles, muddy green eyes made seductive with smoky powders and black mascara, where I blew all my savings in San Diego at Bloomingdale's, cocktail gowns, spike heels, tailored pantsuits, in the vanity light filament glow, like his cigarette cherry 2 months ago, when Igor threatened, "You got 1 week to become fuckable," pointed to my appearance, grimy and disheveled from crawling in the storage locker, squeezing as much product into as little space as possible, dirty nails and packing paper scraps clinging to dress pants, linty nethership's polo, bits of styrofoam and untidy locks. Igor shook his head. "Have your tits ever felt underwire? From now on, you work in makeup, you do your hair, or I send you back to Moncton. Look at you." He waved his coffee mug at the mirror, my full-length reflection. "How do you have the balls to call yourself a woman?" The shop's manager had called me into his office. "Hurry, it's urgent." And the last poem I'm going to read for you is called Thirst. My last ship was well known for being the gayest ship in the fleet, and part of my crowd control training, that's for muster stations, so you can help guests get off the ship in an emergency. And so my muster station leader was Ms. Saturnalia, and this is part of her story. Thirst. In metallic platforms bestowed by former winners, calloused feet alight like swans and float the length of the crew bar. Under the mirror ball, clinging fishnets strut through artificial fog, and strobing laser lights pimp go-go ass sachet. Those slow winking mink lashes, that vinyl gloss pout and sneer. Love to love you, baby. This is the glory of gold lame, the enchantment of taut thighs and Corvette red drugstore nails. Sharp, you want me, hip sass, and thin bronze arms extending into borders of stone wall and disco. Theirs are the transitory silhouettes skimming drop jaw expressions, the enraptured coveting warm Javanese skin tones of waitstaff and sailors, led by the steel heels and platinum curls of Ms. Saturnalia, the fourth son of a fourth son of the faithful, indistinctly related to the prophet. But somehow we overlook their broke-back narratives, their sympathy reassignments here year after year, eyes puffy and dark as they bend over tables draped in bleached linen and damask. Oh, what would we do without these subservient Marias, their delicate hands laying flatware in hotel china, crushing relentless photos of well-mannered girls seeking dependable husbands? Life off this ship, they'll tell you with their Jakarta ESL, water, water everywhere, and not one drop I can drink. An hour before sign-off, Miss Saturnalia's teary mascara and flat chest, wrinkled jeans disguising the most enviable of legs, haunted by a promise made on her behalf to an innocent face, she prays, "Let me get out of this one too." Her partner abandoned his housekeeping cart to curl his fingers into her collarbones, with his knuckles knot her into memories of their nestled bodies contented 2 brief sleeps between midnight buffet and early bird breakfast. The security captain waves his arm, releases us to realities of strict lines. Some smile, others heave luggage and sighs, embrace and bid each other adieu. You, adieu and you, adieu and you, adieu. Flip-flops and Reeboks on the gangway, Ms. Saturnalia's land-tipsy feet echo inside the emptying hull. In her lover's hands, the moonlit locks that launched this, the gayest ship in the fleet. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla, for that reading. Before we go into the questions, I'm just going to jump in with a tech piece here. Just a reminder for folks to put your questions in the chat for our Q&A at the end. And I'll come back now to the questions for you, Kayla. What an incredible body poetry. It's just I think what in reading this, what really struck me about it was that you're exposing this other side of the leisure the leisure industry that we don't necessarily see, right? As consumers, as clients, as, you know, in your description of the cruise ship context, that as passengers wouldn't see or necessarily think about. And you mentioned that the SDGs you're connecting to, and thank you for making that connection, is around gender equality, decent work, and life below water. And so those themes resonate so strongly through what you just shared, the experiences of newcomers, very much as you described, kind of in this context where they don't have a lot of flexibility around their own work life, talking about the ship, Saturnalia, has been my home for 7 years. My wife comes to visit less and less. And the women's equity piece too, and the pressures for female staff in particular, and the expectations in this kind of very, it's such an incredible descriptors. So my question for you is, you know, as you kind of make clear through your writing that these kind of this world that we live in, with this kind of, you know, leisure class and the working class, continues to reinforce existing inequities in our current system for everyone, and particularly workers, around racism, sexism, and classism, among other issues. So what do you see as our collective responsibility in fighting for equitable labor rights, while also acknowledging our own roles in perpetuating the current system? And how does your book support that?
That's a really big question. I don't have an answer for the first half of it, because I think we need to change a lot of things in our society about how we interact with each other, how we see each other as cultural beings, or as just as general human beings. But I think transparency and awareness is a huge step towards that. You know, they told us when we worked on the ships, don't tell them about your day, don't tell them about your personal life. And I mean, that's fine. You don't want to tell your customers about your personal life, but, you know, I worked 104 hours a week with my shipmates at one point, like a week, not a month, a week. And, you know, we were exhausted, we could hardly function. And they graciously reduced that to 94 hours a week, you know, and some of the crew were even laughing at us because they didn't work that much. But still, they, like on the last ship, so it was 3 different ships. I called everything Saturnalia as kind of like an umbrella term, so I wouldn't get sued, because they might, you never know. But I think transparency, talking about it, awareness makes a big difference. You know, that means that people stop, maybe they stop cruising, or they pressure the cruise lines to be better companies, to be better regulated. They're terrible polluters. They will just empty their garbage off the coast and pay the $10,000 fine, rather than pay the port fees to come in and have it processed and go through the recycling and all that sort of stuff. So it's probably the same thing that we're seeing now with rising gas prices and, you know, everything that's been going, like all the smaller revolutions that have been going around with COVID, and during this time when people are just, you know, they're at their wits' end, they don't have enough money to live. They don't, you know, everywhere it's just sort of been a state of crisis. And, you know, I think my book contributes in a very small way to that, but not largely enough, maybe. But I know, like, collectively, I think people that write about their experiences, women that talk about, you know, Me Too experiences, newcomers that write their books and they talk about how difficult it is to integrate into a new culture. How do they preserve their own culture, you know? And Julie, for example, like that very moving reading in her collection of poetry, and like awareness. There's so many things that we haven't been made aware of as a general audience. And, you know, I think there would be a lot more compassion and a lot more motivation if everyone was well educated on these sort of subjects. I mean, that's my hope, but, you know, there's still a lot of work that would need to be done through the government and through corporations. And I think it would be a very radical change, but I would like to see that in my lifetime, hopefully. I think we all would.
My other question for you on that note also was around just because that awareness raising is so important, and I think that is really, you know, strongly done through this work, right? But in terms of the characters that come out, the vividness of it, when you were, I'm curious, really, when you were working in the sector, were those things apparent to you at the time? Were you kind of thinking at the back of your head, you know, this is a really powerful story to tell? Is that something at the time, or was it upon reflection?
I wasn't much of a poet when I started. Like I went to university as a mature student. So I went to the ships before I went to university. So I took things like international development studies. I took some social courses. So there were a lot of things, did anthropology. So I used a lot of my education to figure out what had happened on the ships. Why are these stratifications the way they are? How is post-colonial playing? Why are there still colonial systems on cruise ships? Why is there this much racism? You know, like and I mean, that's complicated in itself, but so the book was actually my master's thesis, and everyone kept saying, you have such great stories, put them in a book, put them in a book. And I was like, they're depressing. You know, when you get down to the bones of it, when you look at like all the stories together, I was like, how do I do this? So I was like, okay, maybe I can learn how to write and be funny about it. Maybe I can layer them. Maybe I can do all these things. What was your question again? This happens a lot lately. I call it COVID brain, but.
You're answering it. Yeah, it was just, you know, what kind of compelled you to write about it? Did you know at the time that you might?
Oh, and the characters. So I had to be really careful because I didn't want to appropriate someone's culture. I didn't want to take their voice. And I'm like, how do I be an observer? How do I like express these things? So like Randeep, the first story I read, except for the ending line, those are things that he said. And I mean, I elaborated a bit more on the details he gave about the village, but aside from that, everything that he said in there was true. And I always remembered that because he wasn't speaking to, you know, the privileged class, which technically I was part of the privileged class on the ship. Right, he was talking to his fellow compatriots, but he would even, like he was saying, you will assimilate, you don't have a choice. And he was very right. So that was something that sort of carried through. And it's also a question that I pose, like, how often do we assimilate? How do we do that? What does it look like? How does it feel? How do we lose ourselves or recreate ourselves within certain boundaries? Same with Miss Saturnalia. I really like, she was thrilled when I figured out, like there was this huge drag show the first 3 weeks that I was on the ship, and she was really thrilled that I was like, oh, you're Miss Saturnalia. And she was like, yes. And we talked about it all the time. And, you know, he could talk about being a drag queen and he can talk about his life. And, you know, he said that line, you know, there's water everywhere and nothing I can drink. And of course I thought of Coleridge, but he didn't know who that was. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But they talk to me too. Like I'm always interested in other people and their lives and how they live, and cultures are, you know, I think we can learn a lot from each other. So that I tried to put that into the book as well, and not to have this monotone voice, not to have just my voice and my perspective. So, I mean, I hope I did that well, and I didn't do it in a way that was too narrow. So
it was really captivating.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
I tend to get excited and run on.
Oh, thank you for painting that picture. Thank you, Kayla. So we are going to move to Jane's work now, and I'm just going to read a short biography of Jane and ask her to read from her work. Jane Lidwell is the Executive Director of the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women. She works towards gender equality for all islanders by promoting changes of attitude within the Prince Edward Island community and by advising the government through evidence-based reports to achieve equality in legislation, policies, and programs. Her focus on gender-sensitive policy is aimed at promoting government accountability in pursuing gender equality. She was one of 2 islanders on the expert advisory panel on the femicide report. This inaugural report acknowledged the gender factor involved in the deaths of women across Canada, as the report found that 53% of the women were killed by relationship partners. As an accomplished author, Jane's work spans multiple genres, including poetry, prose, fiction, and nonfiction. Jane will be reading from her book, Return of the Wild Goose. This book is an autobiographical dialogue between Jane Lidwell and writer and activist Catherine Hughes that offers the reader a fierce remembrance of a PEI radical. Set against the PEI landscape, these poems are inspired by what is known and what is unknown about Hughes' contradictory life as a Catholic teacher in Mohawk territory, as a journalist working alongside Canada's first wave feminists and suffragettes, as the first public archivist of Alberta, and finally, as a zealous propagandist for the Irish cause. Welcome, Jane, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Leanne, and thank you so much to the readers who've gone before me, and I'm so much looking forward to hearing the reader who comes after me. I am participating this morning from Epicwith, from Prince Edward Island, and it is the ancestral and contemporary home of Mi'kmaq people who, and I am here thanks to treaties of peace and friendship, and to the Mi'kmaq welcome of people from around the world, from other First Nations and from around the world. And part of what I've learned in from Indigenous friends and family in what is required of me to become an ally is understanding my own culture, my own ancestry, knowing about the way it played a role, and I play a role in colonization and missionization, in ongoing oppression. And so that's really where I start with this book that I'm reading from today, which is called Return of the Wild Goose. You can see the title nice and backwards there, I think, if you're seeing what I can see. And it's inspired, as Leanne explained, by the life of an activist named Catherine Hughes, who, and the Sustainable Development Goal it relates to most is probably gender equality, because she had many firsts as a woman ahead of her time. And yet she would not probably have described herself as working towards gender equality. She probably would have described herself as working for peace, justice, and strong institutions. And what that looked like in her time was a lot of work that was the work of colonization. In the early part of her life, when she discovered the oppression that existed in Ireland, where her own ancestors had come from, she saw poverty and hunger, and people denied of good health and well-being, people denied of education, denied decent work and economic growth, and it led her to become a radical activist and to die abandoned and alone later in the early part of the 20th century. So the poems do require a little bit of that context, because my project was to weave together similar ancestors and similar experiences that I might have had, but with quite a mysterious and in some ways forgotten figure from the past. So the first poem I'm going to read is really about the what an international understanding of the world can bring us, and it's called In Travel. In travel, she has grown suspicious of the trees, that every strain or cultivar is familiar, not for commonality of soil or air, or leaf unfurled to solar joy, but because all were transplanted by the same foreign hands. So every oak leaf that hangs like rags into February snow and shines exalted in silver frost is the tattered and tenacious flag of the conqueror. The next poem I'm going to read is a little bit about Catherine Hughes, and at 3 phases in her life, she took names that were associated with birds. And so I wanted to tell a little bit about her life through the names of those birds. The first, when she was a missionary and teacher among First Nations, she used the name Omimi, or turtle dove. When she went on an adventure in the Peace River district in Alberta, her Métis guide gave her the name Sisisu, the plover bird, a little yellow-legged bird. And then she took the name Kathleen when she identified herself as a wild goose, and the wild geese were the diasporic community of Irish people who had left Ireland as a result of conditions. So this is called Nom de Plume, Catherine or Three Birds, and it's in 3 sections. The first is Omimi, the turtle dove. Turtle dove, rock dove, mourning dove, Columbide, columba, colombe, that follows the ship that alights on land and calls it Discovery, and sits on the brow of the woods that line the water, only to survey what has always been known by the woods themselves, by the lapping water, by the people of the land and water, not yet supplanted, that follows the voyageur with wary eyes, inland in shaped bark and sewn furs, hemmed into the safety of what is shared or stolen, westward in scattershot shrouds. That returns to the ark with a twist of sprouting olive branch, turning a green shoot emerging from flood into a message, a warning that the human cycle of cruel hope and plunder begins again. The second section, Sisisu, the plover bird. Her cousin in Egypt plucks at the teeth of the crocodile, and no ripple of fear twitches a single rachis, while her island kind brood like tame hens, seeming to break their own wing. I'll start that again. While her island kind brood like tame hens, seeming to break their own wings for the sake of unhatched eggs, limping wounded away from nests at the paws of foxes and the flash of kestrels' eyes and talons. Their talents wasted by the water's edge, unless their hatchlings live, and in living, fly away. The final part is Kathleen, the wild goose. From land we view the squawking V's of flight. Plentiful and mean, wild geese cross the vast formation with those of their same instinct. Inside flight, see only wingtips, feel the pull and lift of drafts behind the sharp, south-pointed leader. Inside instinct, the wildness of blind desire pays little heed to pattern. Geese darken the sky with their flocks and shit the earth green. Time here is one piece of distance. The wild goose arrived tells us a springtime, feeds naming ceremonies. We celebrate arrival without knowing where the return is from. Ask, does the goose hold in its frame or in the architecture of its feathers a longing or a memory of chevrons stretched across the shapes of the stars? And the last poem I will read is really a response to learning more. So a lot of people think that Prince Edward Island, folks who came to Prince Edward Island from Ireland came as a result of the potato famine, but most of my Irish ancestors and most island Irish people came actually before the famine, and so I wanted to reflect on Catherine Hughes' ancestors and my own and their experience before the famine. So this one is called Before the Famine. Before the famine even was the hunger. Hunger learned at the knuckle of the hand that beats and kneads at bread for our betters, while our oilclothed table stands scant. Hunger learned at the breast always needed for the next mouth, all those bodies grown for toil, to dig and reap and disappear to distance, babies born already to the belly of the ship. Hunger clenched and pulled drop by drop from the udder of the master's cow, milk whose cream will rise and travel further than my mother across hills and horizon. Hunger filled by the body and blood of a thin, wan, crucified Christ, consumed by women weeping under the last earthly weight of him, hoisted above the occupied land. Hunger grown from the rich green land. Hunger scraped from furrows with cracked hands. Hunger distilled and drunk as though food. Hunger cast on waters with knit brows. Hunger pulled from crashing waves. And the island that will be famished recedes behind the horizon, and the North Atlantic churns like chime beneath the grief and gnashing hulls. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Oh, there is so much here. So I'm going to just pick on one small part to start for a question, and just to come back to what you were saying to kind of frame your writing. in your second piece that you read, there was the line, "We celebrate arrival of the flock of geese" you were describing, without knowing that where the return is from. And when I was listening to it, what resonated with me was what it connected to what you were saying earlier around, I guess, just our place in time, and kind of having this conversation with Catherine Hughes, as you imagine her to have been in a different century, a different time, and your connection to the SDGs, and how for Hughes, she would have thought of herself as working towards partnerships, SDG 17, but really also there's themes around colonization, gender equality, pieces that, to this day are still reverberating in our current society, and that she was, even as she was doing things that were very progressive for her time, she was also a force contributing to a colonial system as well. So I guess that's kind of a precursor to asking you, in your work, and I know this was part of a larger body of work you were doing when writing these poems, like what was it about Hugh's story in particular that compelled you to write about her? I think you've answered this a little bit already, but if you wanted to speak to it a little more, and how her, like what resonates with you about her story?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the last two books that I have written are both kind of project based, where I seem to kind of get fascinated by particularly historical women who have a connection to PEI and a connection to writing. And so I had written one, and then I was interested in Catherine Hughes after I heard about her biography on the radio, and realized, how close her ancestors and her upbringing were. They were just down the road from my own grandparents, and she went on to this kind of extraordinary life. But I was thinking about what her life was like in Prince Edward Island, how it led to these other kinds of things. Of course, I am engaged in work that is activist in some ways, and all those connections, all those filaments kind of really fascinated me and came together. But I have two, they were small and they are no longer small children. And the reason that I worked in these projects was partly because of fascination, and partly because as a woman with a lot of responsibilities and work and caregiving and I don't know what, a project is a way to fight for creative space in your own life. And that's something that I think there are a lot of people who create art in the world who have to fight for that creative space and time in their own lives as a result of gender, but also as a result of other kinds of oppressions and marginalizations that are imposed from outside. And so sometimes fighting for that space means you just take what's interesting and see how far you can go with it sometimes. Yeah. So if it might have been something else rather than Catherine Hughes, but I just was determined to make that space and to see where I could go with it.
Well, it went pretty far. Yeah, what a wonderful collection of poems to come out of that. I really like that comment about the project as like a space for creative space, but also it is definitely a privilege and something to be fought for, and something that there is inequitable access to. It's such an important point. I guess my second question is kind of building off of pieces you've spoken to. Again, coming back to this place that people are in, find themselves in as a product of their time. What do you think that Hughes' legacy tells us about the connection between personal identity and like larger social change? Just, in the Nimbus book review description of your work, they refer specifically to Hughes as a trailblazer, but not a feminist, as you've also spoken to. So like, what is it about that, her legacy, that maybe readers who maybe don't know as much about her up until this point might take away?
So, when I think about her work on the Irish cause in particular, which came after some of those more institution building projects that she was more involved in, I think about, what people talk about so often when they are working in movements for justice is that when your eyes have been opened, you can't close them again. And I think that she's a really good example of a life transformed by having her eyes opened to a certain kind of oppression, identifying it, and just throwing everything that she had done previously, throwing her career and her prospects into disarray, really, as a result of her commitment to that cause. And now she also wasn't very self-reflective, and I think so. One thing that is, I think, a challenge is that, I think she was so zealous, right? So like after your eyes are opened and you become engaged in causes for justice, in trying to do the work of development in the world, there's also a necessity to be self-reflective, to look at your own past, to look at how things have gone in the past, because she never made a connection, for example, between the colonization that affected Ireland and the colonization she was involved in that affected First Nations people. She didn't make that connection at all. Like, so it's really complex and layered, and a challenge to those of us who want to make a change in the world, to know that that without self-reflection, and without real engagement with the people who are most affected by the injustices, then it can go very badly wrong, as well as being really important and effective. That's a bit of a downer, I think.
It's an important piece, though, I think, and it's one that definitely that conversation that you're having with her, that lack of self-reflection on Hugh's part is resonates through the book. I know there's one poem in particular where she talks about the importance of Ireland's self-determination, and yeah, just the irony of that, as you said, because of her own work congratulating colonization. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jane. We really appreciate your taking the time to join us today. And last but not least, we are going to now hear from Ali Atarnichi. So I'll just read Ali your bio and I'll hand it over to you. So Ali Atarnichi is someone whose motto is live fully, love openly, and be yourself. And he lives up to this belief by enjoying life one day at a time. He is an international organizer of global summits featuring diverse speakers who raise awareness about our humanity, connection, and what is important to us as human beings, rather than focusing on competition, discrimination, division, or exclusion. Ali is an emotional fitness and personal development facilitator and can help you tap into your greatness to find your passion, your vision, and your why. Ali will be sharing from his first book, Just a Cab Driver, My Journey from Behind the Wheel to Behind the Microphone, which is an inspirational and motivational memoir about his life. Filled with true life stories from behind the wheel and from Ali's personal life, it chronicles his journey to fulfill his passion and follow his calling, arriving at his ultimate destination through rejection and redirection. It offers uplifting and original insight and practices to motivate each reader. Welcome, Ali, and over to you. You're on mute. The Zoom saying of the
okay.
Year.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you, Sylvie and Joel, for inviting me for this amazing event. And thank you all the IC member for organizing this. So this is my book that I wrote, my first book, Just a Cab Driver, My Journey from Behind the Wheel to Behind the Microphone. And this book actually was supposed to be written in 2017, but just keep procrastinating it. One day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next day, till one day, and they read a book by Drew Dudley. It's a book called One Day. And what really grabbed my attention in that book, it's one day or day one. So what was happening to me, I was always saying one day, until I decided, I said, okay, that's it. That was 2019 when I decided I want to write it. And I said, day one, there is no more procrastination. There is no more, I need to share my story. I need to put all that in this book. So there is a lot that was going on, and they don't want it to be just like sharing it by talking, but they want it to be captured in a book. From discrimination, from all that stuff that the cab driver go through in their life, from humiliation, from discrimination, as I said, from racism, from all of that. So I will read from this chapter, which called There is More to Life Than Increasing Its Speed. This is a nice quote from Mahatma Gandhi. So driving a cab is a very competitive and aggressive job. They say you have to be hustler and drive fast, hustle, hustle, and hustle. But in my experience of driving a cab for many years, I noticed that the more I focus on money and making a target each day, I only became stressed and nervous. I was doing all I could to reach my goal, but I felt exhausted, drained, and unaligned as I was just chasing the next $10, the next 15 or 20 to reach my target. I wasn't being in the prison or acting intentionally with the client. I decided to change my mindset and focus on quality rather than quantity. I changed 360 degrees so that my passion and focus became more about living intentionally and being grounded. So as I started to capture the good moment, as life is a collection of moments, and started to fill them with happiness and create good lasting memory, I started seeing a result by being calm, taking a deep breath, and having meaningful conversation instead of worrying about the next call. I was listening powerfully and deeply. I could sense the client appreciation, and that reflected big time on my tips. I realized that I was making so much more when I was focused and aligned, rather when I was in rush and hustle. To bring that shift, I was reading a book called This is Day One by Canadian author Joe Dudley, an amazing book that changed my life, along with John Maxwell, Intentional Living. I started to actually pay attention and realize that there is more to life than increasing its speed. So I stopped focusing on money, and they started focusing on service and what I could do for others. Two questions from Dudley book. This is Day One shocked me, woke me up, and changed my perspective. Here are these two amazing questions. Am I living up to what is important to me? I'm only trying to satisfy a list of requirements of life that have been imposed on me? I was not living up to what is important to me. I was not listening to my calling and fulfilling my dreams. I was just chasing money, trying to get as much as I could to satisfy a list of requirements that had been imposed on me. I was driving the taxi to have fun, to enjoy the conversation, but I was learning that my real calling was to speak and to follow my passion of holding the microphone. But my inner critic, my negative self-sabotage, and the fear of not being accepted, that insecurity brought by the racism I experienced as a cab driver, and the way the society looked at me, had me to believe that driving a taxi is the only thing I'm good at. However, Ali, the speaker, the motivator, the coach, the leader, and the positive influencer, he is what is important to me, and I will live up to that image of myself. Another big event that made me really aware that there is more to life than increasing its speed was when, on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, my 3-year-old son and I were going to get some ice cream. So I parked my car by Staple and the ice cream stand. And we walk to withdraw a $20 bill. That's the only $20 was all I had left in my account. But I wanted to leave that moment with my son and spoil him and have some quality time. So I was, as I was walking back to the ice cream stand, holding that $20 bills in my hand, I heard my son say, "Daddy, some people in life, all they worry about is money. No family, nothing, just money, unfortunately." As he said that, I felt that Allah or God was talking to me through my son. I was holding that $20 and looking at it. But when I looked at my son with tears in my eyes, I was ready to let go of that $20. I knew my son, he didn't mean me specifically when he said that. But that woke me up because I was being told to focus on spending time with him instead of working most days and night and just teasing him with a few hours of quality time a week. I was realizing that was not enough, and that dukkha was almost like a drug. While I was doing it, I didn't realize just how fast time was passing, how much time I was passing driving. That was not me. I love to see my son smile, to see him happy and having a good time with his dad. I was being taken away from him and from myself by living to the standard of what have been imposed on me. Just filling a list of requirements that been important instead of living for what is important to me. After that day, my life would never be the same. Even my son noticed my happiness, my calmness, my serenity and focus. I heard him often say, I like the new daddy. And the more time we have together. So the question for you, are you living up to what is important to you, or you're trying to satisfy a list of requirements of life that has been imposed on you? So I have another chapter that's I would like to share with you. That's a grateful spirit can have a happy life, no matter the condition, no matter what. On one beautiful Sunday, Tuesday, I was working. It was the most gorgeous day outside, but not inside of me. I was cranky, depressed, sad. I was going through some rough days. My depression was intense. I felt as though I was living dead or dead living, even though it was gorgeous sunny outside. And inside of me, it was dark and ugly. I got a call to the George Dumont Hospital. As soon as I pulled up to the main door, I saw an old lady with a huge smile walking toward my cab with a cane in her hand. Inside of me, it was like, time is money. That's what we were thinking. I was thinking inside, oh my God, come on, old lady, hurry up. Time is money. But they interrupted that line of thought quickly, and they got out of the cab, and I asked her if she would like some help. Happily, she said, yes, please. I took one of her hand and then put her cane in my other hand and walked her to my cab. After she was all set, she buckled up and we were ready to go. She said, thank God for this beautiful sunny day. I got my results from the doctor and they are all good. I get picked up by a nice, handsome young man and they can't breathe. I just got a new bag for my colostomy. She was so grateful talking about the great thing in her life. I asked her, what is colostomy? It's a surgical procedure that brings one end of my large intestine out through my abdominal wall. During this procedure, one end of the colon is driven through an incision in the abdominal wall to create a stoma. A stoma is the opening in the skin where a pouch for collecting feces is attached, she explained. So I asked, so do you do your business in that bag? Hang it out there, I asked. Yes, son, that's correct, she replied. How old are you? I asked, if you don't mind me asking. I'm 78 years old, son, she answered with gratitude, smiling that huge smile of hers. In my head, I said to myself, she is this old, hardly able to walk, and she has this condition of colostomy, but she is still happy and grateful. I have my eyes, my leg, I can go to the toilet to do my business. I have all my organs and they are all working. I can hear, I can work, I can breathe. What the hell am I missing? We were on our way to destination, which was in the app, and we were still a few minutes away. I was glad that we still had a few minutes to go, as this lady had changed the way I looked at life and gratitude. I asked her, why are you so happy when you have every reason to be depressed? She said, son, why would I not be happy? I'm grateful that I can see, that I can breathe, that I can talk. Even if I had lost a few things, I still function. I still take care of myself. Even at the age of 78, life is about seeing the bright side, the positive, she replied. I told her, you know what? You are an inspiration. You are golden. You have changed the way I look at things and life. I was so depressed before I picked you up, but what I have just witnessed has changed me and shaken me and made me look at my life differently. I asked her, do you mind if I use your story in my speeches and in my future book? She said, whatever helps others, son. When we arrived, I helped her out and she said, how much it is? I said, don't worry about it. You already paid it for it by changing my life. She insisted, but I refused. Her great story and her gratitude spirit and attitude had put me in front of my ego. Now I could look at my ego. I could take away the E and go. That's what the E. I could take away the E and go. Live my life without being controlled or harassed by my stinky bad attitude. As my friend Michelle Boris shared in her speech, the ego, my first summit, what's holding us back from connecting as one world in November 2020. So that's what I did. I started focusing on the great things that were going on in my life and not bad things. I decided not to sweat the small stuff and to be grateful no matter what. It's all practice our gratitude and be mindful of our blessing. And understand that in every rejection, there is a God protection for us when we are going in the right direction. I don't know how much time left for me. I have another chapter, but I think I had the past.
You're right on time. Thank you,
Okay.
Ali, very much for those,
Thank you very
those two
much.
stories. Yeah. So both of those are, as you describe in your book, there are things that happen in the everyday, going for ice cream with your son, picking up a cab fare of someone who's older. But both of those, for you, those were moments that really resonated with you, and it sounds like in both cases were life-changing and kind of illustrate how you use that practice of grounding to shift your mentality. And it's, as I understand, you're now a motivational speaker. So my question for you is, what would you hope that readers would take away from your memoir, particularly now when we're in year 2 of a global pandemic?
What I want my reader to take away from this book or during this pandemic, that take the moment and be grateful for the thing that you have. I know there is always darkness. Now there is so many things that's happening right now, but we need to focus on what we have. We have so many things. We might lose some stuff, but we have more than we lost. And also, if you have a dream, if you have something you want to achieve, think one day or day one. Because if you keep saying one day, it will be maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe next year, but that maybe never come. So take the approach of day one and start and achieve what you want.
Remove one day and just flip it to day one. I love that. That's really good. Lots of good quotes. I liked also the reference to changing ego, removing the E and just go. That's really,
thank you.
That's really great. Thank you. The other question I just wanted to ask was, just in your book, you have a play on words where you say that you moved from through to your ultimate destination from point A to point B, and then you found your why, but like the letter Y. So I love that. What would you say is like, would you say it's that groundedness, or what is the one thing that is the most important to keep in mind when you're trying, for any person trying to find their why? What is like the one thing?
Well, we know most of the time, like when we feel depressed, when we feel anxious, when we feel unhappy, that means sometimes we are not fulfilling the desire that we have. We are not fulfilling the call that God put into us. So when I was driving the cab, I didn't realize that's how I found my why. I was driving people from point A to point B, and by listening to the people, like sometimes when drive a cab, you can be a psychologist, you can be like a mentor, you can be a coach without realizing. And I keep listening carefully. People say, wow, like people like get drunk in my cab or have it like, I just broke up with my boyfriend, I don't know what to do. So you just like kind of like you give them sometimes some advice and stuff, and you hear them like saying, wow, you are really good this. And they start like realizing all the good coming from people. At the end, I realized maybe that is really what I'm good at. Instead of driving a taxi, maybe that is really what I'm supposed to do instead of. So why I was so depressed, why so upset all this time, because I was running away from what I'm good at and listening to people what they are saying. Because as Liz Brown said, people's opinions doesn't have to be your reality. We have to focus on what our opinion about ourselves. So what, back to your question, to get people to focus on what they want, just to listen to themselves, like cut all the distraction, all the noises from outside, and focus on the voice that's coming from inside and listen to it carefully. And that's your answer.
Thank you very much, Ali, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
We are almost at the end of our time, folks. We have a few minutes left. So I think what we'll do, if Roshni has put in the chat here, if you have any questions for the authors, we can take maybe one or two. And I do have one that's come in, and we'll just, I don't know if anyone wanted to add any to the chat or take themselves off mute and ask a question as well.
I'm sure even with this limited amount of time, there's so much everybody would like to ask all of us.
Yeah, and for the four of you too, thank you. Like wonderful, wonderful readings. And I had promised that I would also open the floor to you if any of you had questions for each other as well. So maybe I'll start with that. I know it's tough. Just a few minutes. And I hope everyone sees also there's lots of wonderful thank yous coming in from the chat as well for all of your wonderful readings.
I think I'd just like to thank everybody who took the time and energy to put this together today for all of us. It's such an amazing opportunity for us to share our words and our hearts with everybody. And so even if we don't get a chance to answer any questions, I just wanted to say, you know, walalio to all of you for being here and for everybody for putting it together and for the sharing of these amazing hearts in front of you today. So walalio and thank you.
You're all so amazing. You really are. And it's not that it's difficult to ask questions when you're kind of wowed by it all. I did have one question for Kayla, but first, I just wanted to say that the stories I've heard today are so diverse and so rich, so wonderful. And to me, they're all kind of life-changing depending on how you want to accept them. And I thank you all for that. And my one, a little bit silly maybe question is for Kayla, in that I'd like to know, given that some of your poems are so, as you freely admitted, depressing, but not the way you've written them. Is that time in your life something that you regret or something that you would like to do again?
No, I don't regret it. I think it helped shape me into the person I am today. I think what I regret probably is not having the emotional tools to be able to navigate that environment at that time. I left with a back injury and there were other sort of unpleasant things that happened. But no, sorry, regrets. And I did try to go back. Actually, when I was writing my master's thesis, I was applying to get back on the ships to just go for the summer. You just need to have a deposit for a flight back. So I was like, I'll just quit after like 8 weeks or something. And it didn't work out, which is probably for the best anyway. But Sometimes I miss it. I'm actually kind of tempted to apply as an author and bring my books on board. See how that goes. Teach some writing. So yeah, no, I'm always grateful for the exposure it gave me and to show, it shows you just how many inequalities exist and that we shouldn't be passive about that we shouldn't just accept that as the way it is.
And it built who you are today.
Mm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have a question for Julie. What's your process? I'm just curious, like, how do you like to write? How do your poems come to you? How do you put them down on the page?
Well, for me, what I end up doing is I think of a story because first and foremost, I'm a storyteller. And then I add rhyme and rhythm to it so that it has a beat. And believe it or not, a lot of my poems are the starts of songs. So it's a metamorphosis. It starts as a story or a teaching or a lesson, and then it morphs into this beautiful poem. And then that poem will eventually and hopefully morph into a song that can be I like to make sure first that it's worth sharing, that it has value, that it's something that I feel I want to share my heart with my heart. And so then, yes, it always has to be a story first. And once there's a story, then you have to take it and put it into a different type of form, and then it evolves. So it's always an evolution. So never think that what you've written is concrete and it's stone, because it can change, it can evolve with you as you grow too. So always think that's sort of my steps, how I do it. It's always a story first, something that comes into your heart and your mind, and then it evolves.
I feel that way too. And I like how you said that your writing has many lives. I think that's important too. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see we have one more question from Sharon.
Hi, and I hope this is, I feel like it's a good place to ask, and it probably leans towards Julie and Jane the most. If either of you have comments just around that understanding of when your ancestors are people who were affected by colonialism, and that, Jane talked about the Irish diaspora, and but then today we're also benefiting from the colonialism that happened in North America. And I guess just any comments around understanding your place in that, or just, finding that balance between knowing that you were negatively impacted by it, but now today you're also benefiting from the colonialism that happened in the past.
I don't mind answering really quickly, and that's just to say that, most people in the world have are the product of the survival of ancestors who experienced depression. And it doesn't diminish our responsibility if we're beneficiaries of white supremacy, of colonization, of whatever the dominant forms of power are in our society. Or it doesn't diminish the responsibility on me to recognize what's going on around me and who is affected today, and who is affected by me and who is affected by my community and how I'm implicated in that. And that's my point of view.
Thank you, Jane. That was awesome. And the only thing I think I could add on to that would be that when I grew up, I didn't really have the words or the tools, but as I got older, they came to me from elders and teachings and stories. And what I've learned is we might be buried, but we are a seed. And what we come forth with is what we're going to send down to future generations. So what the word that sort of became this magical word for me was resilience, how we take the things that have been passed down to us, how we take these emotions, these stories, this intergenerational trauma, and work with it and move forward so that our next generation can be stronger. And that's what I feel my responsibility is. We're a seed and we're growing.
Thank you. That's awesome.
What powerful words to end this event on. I just want to thank you all again so much for taking the time and sharing your beautiful works with us. Links have been, just to move into the housekeeping portion to close out the event this morning, the links have been shared in the chat to all of the authors' websites and information as to where everyone's books can be found. So please do check those out. I again want to extend my deepest thanks to Julie, Jane, Kayla, and Ali for joining us and for sharing their art, their stories, their passion and energy with us. And I will pass it back to Joelle now to close out this morning's event. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Leanne. And I cannot think of a better way for us to wrap up International Development Week than the conversation that we just had. And I know for myself, my to-read list just got 4 books longer. And I just cannot wait to delve into these works more. I want to thank you, Jane and Julie, Ali and Kayla, for giving us your time, sharing these words with us, and Leanne for facilitating such a wonderful conversation and asking such poignant questions. Just a couple of things to close out really quickly. One of the projects that ACIC and the Intercouncil Network took on this week is an online zine that features artwork from artists across Canada titled Art 2030. And you can access the zine via the link Roshni just put in the chat. It has such beautiful art in it, and I really hope that you all check it out. We are also hosting a listen, read, watch campaign this week. We're inviting people to share recommendations of their favorite books, movies, songs, podcasts, any kind of media that connects to the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you make a recommendation, you can have a chance of winning a $40 gift card to help you continue to listen, read, watch books, and maybe some of the books that we heard here today. And I think Rashni's also going to put a link in the chat on how you can enter to participate in that. And like I said, for our survey, if you fill it out, it should take about 2 to 3 minutes, and you'll be entered to win a prize pack featuring the books that were shared here today. So a really great way to potentially get your hands on all 4 of the books that our authors read from. So thank you again for joining us this morning. Thank you to our authors, to Leanne for moderating. I hope everybody has a wonderful end of the week and a wonderful end to International Development Week, and a wonderful day today. So thank you all.